This week marks a year since I sold my home and became a full-time vagabond, traveling the world full-time until I eventually settled down again. And that's once I figure out where that's going to be. I've dreamt of traveling full-time for years. I did my first test drive, or rather I should say extended test trip, of 6 weeks in France back in 2016, I think it was. I chose France because I don't speak French, and I had heard that I wouldn't meet many French folks who spoke English, so I thought that would be a good place to test out being outside my comfort zone with a completely foreign language. But I figured the French culture was both close enough to mine that I wouldn't feel completely discombobulated by the differences, yet it would be different enough so I'd still feel like I was in a foreign country. Delightfully, after 6 weeks, I still wasn't ready to return home, so I figured I must be cut out for this long-term travel thing. I'm now also closing in on 2 years since I bought Sophie, my camper van conversion. With her, I did a test run on a long trip road tripping during the COVID summer of 2020. In Sophie, I explored the U.S. for 3 months. It was on that trip that I solidified my decision to travel full-time, so when I returned home, I sold my house and hit the road. I tootled around in Sophie for 3/4 of a year, and within that, I did spend 3 multi-week stays in one place so that I'm not constantly on the go. So I did like to mix it up a little bit. But most of the rest of the time, I was exploring the Southwest and the Midwest of the United States. On today's show, I want to share some of the insights I've learned on this crazy past 2 years. I hope that you'll learn from my mistakes and some of my good choices and get the inspiration to travel maybe in a way you'd not yet considered. You don't need to be a full-time vagabond to gain from today's show. I think you'll come away with some ideas on how you can add more travel to your life, and it doesn't have to be expensive. So let's get started. Welcome to the Active Travel Adventures podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks. On today's show, I want to review and bust some travel myths and offer some tips I've learned about traveling. Sometimes learn the hard way. Plus, I'll offer some of my money-saving tips so you can afford to travel more. I want to start with myths, because myths can sometimes hold you back from getting out there and doing some of the things that you want to do, particularly when it comes to travel in this case. So, myth number 1, travel is expensive. I can't afford to travel. Sure, it's really easy to make travel expensive, but by no means does it have to be. Right this minute, I'm working on the show sitting in a $33 a night private ensuite Airbnb in the heart of Old Town in Europe. Last night, my delicious dinner cost under $10, including 2 beers in the tip. I had enough leftovers for a second meal. Lunch cost me just $4. And for breakfast, I had an apple, a large yogurt, and some homemade bread with butter. Ingredients I picked up at a local grocery store that cost maybe $2 max. Total cost for the day, $49. Now, I often book group day tours, like I also did yesterday, and that'll set me back usually anywhere between another $30 to $50, sometimes more. But many of the tours are ones that you can do by yourself. I like the convenience, and since I travel solo, I also like the socialization and getting to meet some new people. And like I said, I'm in Europe. But I'm in Eastern Europe. Similar gorgeous architecture, fascinating histories, stunning landscapes, but at a fraction of the price. And as a bonus, it's not as crowded here either. I often meet young people traveling the world, and they'll stay in a hostel around here for just maybe $10, $12. In expensive cities, I myself am not averse to staying in hostels to save some dollars. Here's what I paid for some city hostels over the last couple of years, most of which I booked as a private room, sometimes with a shared bathroom, but often not. Rome, $70. Tel Aviv, $100. Barcelona, $60. Even San Diego for just $40. You'd pay 3 times that or more at most of these cities. A major reason I like hostels, even if not to save money, is that they have a community area so I can get some socialization, which is especially important when you travel solo like I do. Plus, they usually have a common kitchen and fridge that you can use, although I rarely cook in them, many folks do. I'm not often the only mature person there either. I use the Hostel World app to find where to stay, looking as always, first at location and safety, then cleanliness and amenities. I do not stay at party hostels. If you look at the reviews, the app will tell you that. I almost always book a private room, although I have on rare occasions booked a female ensuite, meaning that while I might have roommates, usually the 4 of us females would share a bathroom in the room, not just one down the hall. In the US, I've been steering away from Airbnbs because the cleaning and booking fees had gotten so outrageous, and because I'm mad that until recently they knew my dates, but they weren't factoring that in when listing the price of properties with these additional fees. So I was wasting a lot of time looking at places I would never stay in because the fees were too high, but I wouldn't know it until I was ready to check out. So far, at least in Eastern Europe, I'm not finding that to be the case. The fees are very manageable. And I'm also usually staying about 5 days in a place, so whatever fees there are amortized over so many days, they're just not as painful. In addition to my location, safety, and security checklist, with Airbnb, I also look for a washing machine so I can avoid the laundromat. Usually they include the soap, at least in the US they usually do, but I've learned to check the listings for all amenities in Europe. I've found most include nothing extra. I like when the unit has basic toiletries, a coffee maker or electric kettle, plus some coffee and teas, olive oil, vinegar, spices, etc. These little things will make a big difference in your comfort, many of which you would never pack. And you don't want to buy. In fact, one of my first stops, I ended up buying a whole bottle of vinegar just because I needed some greens, and so I figured I'd just put some red vinegar on as my salad dressing. So read the listings carefully because they usually describe exactly what they offer. When I was traveling in Sophie, I often boondocked for free on public lands. In the US, you can camp for free on some of the country's most beautiful settings. And usually you can also stay for up to 14 days before you have to move on to someplace else at least 30 miles away. I did a show on that on the Adventure Travel Show podcast, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes. I stayed in a lovely site 10 miles outside the Grand Canyon. I've stayed right on the water in several places. Sometimes I've had the entire area to myself, and other times there's campers nearby. If this appeals to you, you can also listen to the Sophie Diary past episodes for more information. And also check out my friend Susie Blackshaw's This Land Is Your Land book she just published that tells you exactly how to do this. I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. Some countries, such as Scotland, allow wild camping in almost all rural areas. You have to wait until just before sunset to set up camp and then tear down at dawn and before you move along. Another thing I like is joining group tours for expensive locations. This has the benefit of you knowing exactly how much you're going to spend, for the most part I should say. Plus, you can usually make payments, so it's not really painful all at one time. I also like that your trip is almost all paid for before you go, so you don't return home to some nasty credit card surprise. In the Dolomites, on my Active Adventures tour, we either stayed in super nice inns or when we were in the mountains at the mountain huts. But these weren't any regular mountain huts, or at least none I've ever seen. They were more like eco-lodges. And in all of them, the meals were outstanding and included, plus we had 2 great guides. In Slovenia, on my 1 Foot Abroad self-guided hike, we were put up in much nicer inns than I would have ever coughed up for myself. And I'm guessing, I don't know this, but I'm guessing that 1 Foot Abroad gets a special rate at these inns because the tour isn't that expensive to start with. And it includes the hotel, luggage transfer so you don't have to haul all your junk all the time, a hearty breakfast, our e-bikes on the days that we were biking, van transfers as needed, plus our map and itinerary. We basically had everything we needed, and all we had to worry about was lunch and dinner. I am definitely going to travel this way again. On the Croatian island hopping bike tour with BikeTours.com, virtually all of our meals were included. My e-bike, of course, was included, and I got to stay on a beautiful boat with a fantastic crew and our 2 wonderful guides and 20 other cool fellow bikers. So yes, lodging is a major travel expense, but as you can see, there are many ways to cut down this biggie. So you say, well, travel really is expensive. What about transportation? Yes, transportation. That's the next biggest nut you need to crack if you want to travel more affordably. When it comes to transportation, the biggest money and time waster I've found is trying to quote-unquote see too much in a short period of time. When you try to do so, you spend way too much time sitting in a transport vehicle, be it a plane, car, van, train, bus, whatever, than you do actually seeing the sights you came to see. I try to spend at least 3 nights in the same place, preferably 5, before moving on. Not only are you saving by not spending all the extra transportation costs, you're not getting as tired, and you get to actually see more, and you aren't wasting so much time packing and unpacking all your gear. Then when I leave, I feel like I've really done justice to whatever areas I'm visiting. I did an entire episode on my companion podcast, The Adventure Travel Show, and I'll put links in the show notes, which digs down deeper into saving money on transportation and other travel expenses. So I refer you to that so I don't get bogged down into the details on this. I just want to kind of give a rough overview of some of the ways that I think that travel does not have to be expensive. As far as app goes, I get a lot of requests for this. My favorite app to plan transportation is called Rome to Rio, and that's 2 with the number 2. Either use the app or you can go directly to the website. You simply type in your starting and end point, and then it'll give you your options. It'll tell you how long each option takes and about how much it's going to cost. It's not foolproof, but it's pretty darn good. Sometimes you can buy your tickets directly on the app, which is something I found really helpful in France, where instructions on ticketing machines were only in French. But even then, at the main stations, you're generally going to find some English, and usually the ticket office will have somebody that speaks English. The only really difficult time I ever had was in France, which was a funny story that you'll have to listen to my French episode. I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. Generally speaking, though, at main stations, you're going to find some English, somebody who speaks English, always find a young person if not. If you download ahead of time whatever languages of the country you're visiting on the Google Translate app, even if you're offline, the app can translate signs for you using your camera on your phone. And I've actually used that a few times in this country that has a few extra letters in their alphabet. And while I'm thinking about it, always pin your lodging location on your map app so no matter how lost you get, you can find your way back home. It too works offline. Sometimes buying a rail or a bus pass might make sense for you, but check the numbers because most of the times I find for me it does not. Here are a few things I do to avoid getting lost and how I manage my transportation and getting around just in general. Number 1, I make sure I know where the bus or train station is well ahead of time so I can figure out how much time to allow for getting there. Often I'll go there in person, so I familiarize myself with the ticketing process and where I need to pick up the bus or train or whatever. I almost always do this when there are few options for me and I can't afford a mistake that might mean waiting around all day or even a later day to try again. And then I allow for some screw-up time, generally arriving about 30 minutes before the departure. Sometimes buses are a bit early, and I've found the schedules in Europe, including Eastern Europe, to be pretty reliable. Number 2, before I head out to the next destination, and when I have Wi-Fi service, I take screenshots with my phone of any check-in instructions, a map from the bus station or train station to get to my lodging, and the address and phone number so I can show a cabbie if need be. I found sometimes, even though I have unlimited data, that they throttle it down and I'm not able to pull up attachments. So this way with the screenshots, I always have something I can access no matter if I have the internet or not. I always make a point to never assume I'm going to have cell service. Of course, you can get a local SIM card and avoid this problem altogether of having the cell service, but I like to just keep my number, not worry about it. I don't want to carry a separate phone, and so this works for me. Number 3, when I arrive at the lodging, like I said earlier, I mark my location on my phone map app. This will help me find my way back home offline should, and actually when, I get lost. I'll also do the same thing when I'm at a trailhead or with a parking spot or any place I want to make sure I can find my starting place. It's a good habit to get into. 4, I usually keep my phone in airplane mode whenever I'm overseas or out in rural areas. That keeps the battery from draining. But again, whenever I have Wi-Fi and when I'm trying to find a certain destination, I'll get the directions on my map app and then go back into airplane mode to save the battery juice. Speaking of which, always start your day off with a full charge on your phone because your phone is often your lifeline. So these are some of my transportation tips. Another big expense, of course, is food. Depending on how you do it, food can be a big expense or not. Foodies with a big budget, go for it. I tend to mix it up with about a third each of the following types of meals. Number 1, very basic food, meaning I fix my own meal with ingredients from the store. Access to a fridge is important here, and a stovetop and microwave help even more. You can have cereal or yogurt breakfast, even eggs if you have a stovetop. You can make sandwiches for lunch or have a simple bread and cheese, maybe with some sliced tomato for lunch. With the kitchen, I may make pasta along with a tossed salad. If you have access to a kitchen, that means you don't just have the fridge, stovetop, and microwave, but also plates, bowls, utensils. I plan on bringing my camping spork in the future, which is a hybrid plastic knife, fork, spoon. It would have come in very handy on some of my non-kitchen rentals that I've stayed in. So in summary of number 1, if you eat simple, basic food, you can do so for about the same price as eating at home. Sometimes less, sometimes a little more. The second way I eat is like a local. While locals often hang out in cafes drinking coffee all throughout the day, when they eat out, they usually eat the local dishes, which is going to be a lot cheaper than the typical Western fare. This means in Latin America, you're going to be eating a lot of chicken, rice, and beans. Other parts of the world, you'll eat stews. Here where I am right now, lots of meats, minced meats. So basically, if you eat the local dishes, it's going to be a lot cheaper. And the third way, of course, is treating yourself to a little bit more expensive meal. And sometimes I'll opt for the more expensive local food, like the river trout dinner I had the other night. But expensive is relative. In my touristy Old Town area, I paid about $15 for 2 fabulous grilled trout, roasted vegetables, a salad, and a beer. I bet if I walked a few blocks out of Old Town where the locals actually are eating, I would have paid even less. Other times, I miss my food and I'll splurge on touristy or Western food. So I think if you mix it up, you'll enjoy saving money on those meals and then really appreciate your finer meals. For the same reason, I like to mix up my lodging. It keeps me appreciating things. An interesting side effect of COVID is that restaurants that would never in the past, there's certain countries they just didn't do leftovers or doggy bags. But with COVID, in order for them to stay in business, a lot of times they started doing takeaway when that wasn't something in the past. Now they are geared up to do that. So taking home your leftovers and reheating those for lunch the next day is a great way to save money. Regarding restaurants, I've gotten better at using online reviews to help me choose which restaurant to go to. And I can thank Noma for leading the way here. In Venice and Ljubljana, she always did research. I don't think she had a bad meal on our trip. Before, I'd just look for which restaurant was busy or looked interesting, but that method has led me to some mediocre meals. So I've gotten much pickier since traveling with Noma. Peg, too, is a foodie, so between the two of them, I have upped my food game. The last big expense when it comes to travel costs is attractions and things to do. One inexpensive way to learn about a city is to take one of the usually tip-based walking tours. Plus, you get to meet fellow travelers, which can be helpful for solo travelers, as I mentioned earlier. And remember that the Tourist Information Office is your friend. Not only can you gather helpful, usually free maps and info about what to see, they can advise you about what attractions are free or low cost and advise if certain attractions have free days. They often sell a city pass with discounted or free entrances to many attractions with the pass. For example, I purchased a $45 7-day pass in Dubrovnik that saved me probably about $30. And since I paid for the pass and I had the time, I made it a point to see all the museums and attractions that came with my pass. So I discovered some wonderful jewels that I would have passed on if I had to pay separately out of pocket. And don't forget, getting out in nature is free. Although often you'll have to pay an entrance fee for national parks around the world, they still make for inexpensive fun. To find places to hike, I use my paid All Trails app. If you download the trail you want to ahead of time when you have Wi-Fi, it'll work offline, which is super helpful as you're not likely to have cell service in mountains, for example. So in summary, if you can get a handle on the 4 big expenses of travel, lodging, transportation, food, and attractions, you can travel pretty inexpensively. Just ask any of the young people you meet along the way. So myth number 1, that travel is expensive, is busted. The next myth I want to bust is travel is dangerous. Sure, there are places that are dangerous, but for the most part, it's unlikely that you're going to go there. When I meet Europeans, they're worried about all the gun violence in America. I explain that while, for example, a certain part of Chicago might have 20 shootings in a weekend, if you don't go in that neighborhood, you're probably going to be fine. Even in the still a bit riskier touristy city areas, if you take common sense precautions, you're unlikely to have an incident. I also remind them that the U.S. is a huge country and that, again, using that same Chicago example, most of the country is thousands of miles from Chicago. Gun violence is unheard of where I was living in eastern North Carolina. And when I lived in Cary, North Carolina, near the capital, it was super safe with Zippo crime. Yet Durham, 20 miles away, had a shooting every weekend. So my advice is just visit the safe places and the odds are going to be in your favor. That being said, I do try to assess the risk of any place I visit before I go. Some places I check include the State Department travel website. I also post my trips on their STEP program, STEP standing for Smart Travel Enrollment Program, I believe. So in case of trouble, they know where I am should a war, a terrorist attack, or some kind of natural disaster occur. But the State Department warnings are often very dire, overly dire, in my opinion, especially now with COVID. So many countries have a do not travel advisory, but I've had 3 shots, I've had COVID, so I'm unlikely to get or pass on COVID to others. And I can't emphasize enough that this is a great and a unique time to travel because the crowds are down dramatically. Venice wasn't crowded. Rome wasn't crowded. It hasn't been like that in probably 50 years. I wasn't even expected to like Venice because I'd heard it was so crowded. I heard it was crowded, dirty, smelly. However, I got to see Venice like it was back in probably the 70s, before cruise ships overran this jewel. I was enchanted. So when it comes to the safety issues, one of the big things I do is I ask the locals. They know, they want you to have a safe visit, they want you to be happy with their country, and they will tell you. For example, when I wanted to go to an evening meetup in France, I checked out the meeting point earlier in the day and I asked the locals about safety for a solo woman at night. I was told repeatedly, as long as I stayed on the main streets and avoided the park, I was going to be fine. In Arusha, Tanzania, I was told every place was fine except for the bridge area. That's where the trouble was. Just don't go by the bridge. I also remember a podcast I listened to once about a gal who biked across the United States. In each town, she was asking locals about what safety precautions were needed in their town. And it was funny how the townies would say, our town is fine, but you got to be careful in the next town. It kind of tells you something. She never had a problem. Everybody's always a little bit afraid of the unknown, of the other. And I have found that almost all places I visit are fine. I'm very careful, of course, and I don't flash money, jewelry, or fancy electronics around. I'm very aware of my surroundings, and I don't leave a drink unattended. I'm generally back at my lodging by 9 o'clock, and I definitely try to be checked into my lodging before dark. Initially, I was worried about me traveling solo. Remember, unknown, scary. But I can't think of a time where I really felt afraid since I've been doing so. And I've been to some countries, many ask me, weren't you scared? Bosnia, where I am right now, included. You think Bosnia, you think war. However, you forget, it's been over 25 years. I think the fear factor, like I said, comes from the unknown. But you know what I've discovered in the 6 continents I visited? Bottom line is, we are all the same. We are the same in all countries, all religions, all ethnicities. We just may look, talk, and act differently, but on the important issues, the deep down soulful issues, we are the same. The politicians may cause some problems, but we as individuals all want the same thing. We want to feel safe, we want to have a full stomach, we want a proper roof over our head, and a reason to get up in the morning. And we want for our children to do better than us. So when you travel to foreign lands, look at the locals through this lens, and you will observe this truth. Obviously, I'm not saying travel to warlord or war areas, of course. But even there, if you were to simply hang out with a civilian, you're going to find this truth there just as well. I'm very confident of this. So my advice, if you pack your common sense and then remember to use it when you're traveling, and you ask the locals on the ground, you're going to be fine. So now that I've busted the 2 biggest myths I find, that travel is expensive and that travel is dangerous, the next thing that people ask me about a lot is, how do I choose destinations? So let's talk a little bit about destinations. We all, of course, have our reasons for choosing a specific destination, but often I found it boils down to somebody just talking about their trip, which inspires you to go there as well. Hopefully this podcast has added a few destinations and adventures to your list. In fact, it was my interview with Annie about the Dolomite hiking adventure that prompted me to book it myself. I just remember how Annie, who is a serious world adventure traveler, commented that this was the perfect trip. It was a fantastic mix of hiking and adventure with great food and outstanding landscapes, and it was a lot of fun. It took me several years, but I finally got to do it. So maybe my Dolomite trip, when I cover it, will inspire you as well. Who knows? But things are a little bit different when you're long-term traveling. It's almost impossible, unless you are a serious list maker and planner, to stick to a rigid schedule. Any attempts go out the window within a couple of days, even when I was in Sophie. So I finally just gave up. Now I think days in advance, not weeks, not months. I might know the length of time I think I'm going to be out, like I think I'm going to be out for 6 months, but I generally don't plan more than a couple days in advance. This also offers the huge benefit of allowing for serendipity. I know at first traveling without a plan sounds a little scary, like you're walking on a tightrope without a net, but it's really a lot of fun. So here are a few of my thoughts on choosing destinations for my months in Sophie and now here in Europe, along with a few of my earlier lessons from my 6 weeks in France a few years back. These were all free-flowing trips. I think it's good to have a general idea where you want to go, but allow for flexibility. So for me, on this trip, I went to explore the Balkans. If you can't remember where they are, I want you to hold 3 fingers up on your hand. So your entire hand is the Mediterranean Sea, but the sea has 3 bigger seas within that sea, which are represented by your upright fingers. On your far left finger is called the Tyrrhenian Sea, and I may have mispronounced that. This is the water on the western side of Italy near Rome. And no, I didn't know that's what it was called either. It turns out the Mediterranean is actually made up of 12 separate seas. So that when you travel around the stiletto heel of Italy over to its east side, the right side of your first finger, along with the left side of your middle finger, that sea is the Adriatic Sea, which is where I am now. In fact, up near the northernmost point between these 2 fingers, you'll find Venice, where I started my Dolomites tour. And very close by, on the northeast corner of your middle finger, is Slovenia, bordering Italy. Then if you continue down the left side of your middle finger, you're going to reach Croatia, which is where I started my bike and boat tour. Last week after my tour, I headed inland from Dubrovnik to its neighbor, Bosnia. For the rest of the year, I'll be zigzagging my way down the left side of the middle finger along the Adriatic coast. And for the record, on the left side of your third finger is the Aegean Sea. Here's where you'll find Athens, Greece on the western shore and Turkey on the eastern side, or right side of your third finger. Easy peasy. So when you think about the Mediterranean Sea, think of your 3 fingers. It's the Tyrrhenian that I can't pronounce, the Adriatic, and then the Aegean Sea. So for this trip, since I was going to be in the northern Balkans, I decided to concentrate on this region and visit several of the Balkan countries, which include the Slavic nations of Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Bulgaria, Croatia, Kosovo, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Romania, Serbia, and Slovenia. Portions of Greece and Turkey are also within this Balkan peninsula. I should note that half the world thinks Kosovo is part of Serbia, half believe Kosovo is an independent nation. So once I decided to explore the Balkans, this is pretty much how I figure out where to go next. So the first thing I do is Google the best places to visit in insert country. It might be best places in Slovenia, best places in Croatia, etc. And I'll look through blog posts and just kind of scan through and make a little list of towns or parks that I'd like to see. Not necessarily that I'm going to see, just these are ones of interest. If I particularly like it, I'll put a star by it. And that's all I do in this one step. I don't drill down any deeper into writing down, oh, these are the things I want to see in the city. I generally, unless I have some time to kill and I know I'm going to go, don't do any of that until I actually visit the Tourist Information Board. So then I've got my basic, this is kind of a wish list. So then the second thing I do is open up Google Maps, and then using the directions feature, I keep adding the destinations that are on my list. I could care less about the order. It's going to be a crazy looking map with the zigzagging because I don't know the geography of the country yet. So I don't worry about that. I'm just trying to get an idea of where the different places are in proximity to each other. And so I don't have to go through this whole process again. I'll draw a really rough map of the different towns and their proximity so that I can make notes on that. So I'll just draw just a dot, write the town name, and kind of put them roughly in proportion where they are, and then I can just shoot out little notes from there. So I've got a general idea now of the geography of this country. So then the third thing I do is I got to figure out how hard is it to get to the different places. I generally don't rent a car. It's very hard to navigate and see things driving, particularly in a different country, and I choose not to go there. At least at this point, I choose not to go there. I want to use public transportation. So the third thing I do is go back to my favorite little Rome to Rio app and find out which places are feasible for me to visit without killing myself. I'm going to delete any ones that are going to be too difficult to get to. If they require hiring a private car to get me any length of time outside of a short taxi ride, they get crossed off. Unless it's something so spectacular, I got to do that. And probably in that case, I'd probably rent a car. And there's also one more option I'll go over in a minute. But for right now, I just play with the app to try to figure out the best way for me to get around the country. A lot of this is going to be obvious from your map, but some little towns may not have transportation, or the bus ride there is so long or inconvenient that you may just want to cross it off your list. But don't do that yet, because in the bigger cities, always the capitals, but usually at least one or two more regional larger cities, you can Google day trips from insert that city. And in this way, you can usually find a base town that you can settle in for several days or a week or so, or however long time you have, and then head out each day on a new adventure. Yes, you're going to be doing some overlap on road time that you could avoid by going forward and not going back and forth, but there's something to be said for resting your head on the same pillow for several nights in a row instead of lugging all your junk around all the time and killing a morning because you're waiting for a bus. All that time takes a lot of time and kills a lot of your vacation. And another good thing is private group tours usually leave first thing in the morning, really early in the morning. Whereas, like I said, if you're using a public bus, it may not leave until 11 o'clock and you've killed your day just trying to get there. Whereas on the private group tour, you might be there an hour or two, you might be there by 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. And even really more important, you get dropped off and picked up exactly where you need to go, when you need to go. So it's important. Look at all the different variables and decide what works best for you. So I'm making little notes on my little hand-drawn map. And so now I'm kind of narrowing down, all right, these look like potentials. I'm still not booking anything. I'm just trying to get a general idea, okay? Let's take Serbia. I don't know anything about Serbia. I know the capital's name. But I see several intriguing places that are of interest. So now I got to figure out, this whole region is very mountainous. So that doesn't mean just because it looks close, it's easy to get to. You got to get the roads to get to. The infrastructure here is not as built out as you might find in other countries. So I just right now have a general idea. So then I told you there's another little way that you might be able to get to someplace that doesn't have public transport. But, so this is my number 4 tip, and I just used this for the first time because I ran into this problem when I was in Dubrovnik and I want to go to the city of Mostar in Bosnia. However, the one and only public bus didn't get in till well after dark, and I really try to stick to the rule of being checked into my new lodging while it's still daylight out. That gives time for foul-ups, finding another place to stay in case something gets messed up. I'm not wandering around with my backpack in the dark, etc. So I try really, really hard to follow that. But if I wanted to go to Mostar, which that was where I really wanted to go the most in this country, I was going to have to come up with another solution. So what I did was contact a tour company that ran a day tour to Mostar. And I said, listen, I want to stay in Mostar. Any problem with me just staying there and you holding onto my backpack while we do the tour? No problem, they said. So for about double the price of what the bus fare would have been, I got picked up first thing in the morning, took a private nice vehicle on the way to Mostar. We stopped by, visited a pretty waterfall. I wouldn't have been able to see that, spent like an hour or two there, and then headed into the town, got a guided tour, and at the end of the tour, I put my backpack back on and walked the quarter mile to my lodging. It was perfect. And I got there at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon instead of at 7:30 at night. A 5th pointer. I had to do things, of course, differently when I was road tripping in Sophie, my van. Here, I tried to limit driving to about a maximum of 150 miles per day whenever possible, and I tried to stay at least 2 nights anywhere, so I always felt like I was touring and not just driving around in the van. This last time I was doing Sophie, it was in the early spring, so it was rather cool. So I actually spent the night in the van. So it was really easy to pack up and move. So I could feasibly have done every day. But if I'm packing up stuff, I want to stay someplace at least a few days. So to choose destinations, I had my Rand McNally Atlas, and in it I had taken some small Post-it notes that I cut into like thirds, and on them I made little notes of people or places I wanted to see, and I just stuck those all over my Atlas. So whenever I got close to a new state, I'd open up my Atlas and look at my Post-it notes, and did that give me an intuitive route of where I'd like to go? And then within that, I would look for big green areas that might indicate a park or someplace interesting that I'd like to hike or bike. And with a highlighter, I'd roughly outline a path. But again, always subject to change because you meet people and they tell you about something cool, and so you zig and you zag and you just kind of work your way around each day, kind of figuring out, do I want to stay another day or not? This low-tech method worked great for me. And I actually started doing it when I was readying my house for sale. Remember, I had to put all my stuff in storage that I wanted to keep, so I wanted to get rid of anything I could possibly get rid of. And all these years of travel clippings, and I think it was file drawer fulls of travel folders, got boiled down to a town with a Post-it note stuck on it. And I got rid of and recycled all of those clippings. And because of the internet now, I can simply Google the town and figure out what it was that appealed to me, because it's going to pop up. Whatever appealed to me then, it's going to show up to me again. And I don't have to carry around all that paperwork. And internationally, since I don't have a similar system, so I have that on my computer. I just created a Google spreadsheet, a Google Docs spreadsheet. It's divided by continent. And then as I have a country that has a place I want to go to, I add a country to the continent with another column of the town or the thing that I'd like to see. So that way I'm getting a running list that I keep building on. So should I go to that country? I open up the spreadsheet. Oh, these are the places in Colombia that look like they're cool. And then from there, then I can do my little map thing like I talked about earlier. So that's how I figure out how to get to where I'm going to go. And then as far as lodging, that depends on how expensive the place is going to be. I have a limited travel budget that when this money's out, then I got to really start dipping into my retirement savings. So I kind of mentally separate my travel things. So I try to do what I want to do, but I want to do it in an economical way, if that makes sense. So I'm here in Eastern Europe. It's so inexpensive that I have no problem doing an Airbnb. They're all really, really inexpensive, and for the prices I'm paying, it's lovely. If I go to an expensive city, if I go to Paris, I'll probably stay in a hostel. All right, so that's how you figure out where you're going. How do you know what to bring? What do you pack? So the shorter answer is bring far less than you think you're going to need. You're going to end up wearing the same things over and over again, just like I do at home. That's what I do on the road. So most of the stuff you end up thinking you're going to need ends up crumpled and unused, and you're just lugging around all that weight. So really pare it down. So my particular story, now I'm doing one backpack. It's got to do lots of things. I've got to be able to do all 4 seasons because I want to be able to travel the world with what's on my back. I also need the gear for hiking, biking, and paddling. That was a bit of a problem. I got a bike helmet in my backpack. That takes up probably 1/6 of my pack. So what I ended up doing is having a lot of gear or clothing that is a dual purpose. So sometimes they're only a decent substitute, not the best thing that you would have chosen if you're just doing a dedicated activity. So for example, I didn't bring long bike pants in case it got cold. If it gets cold, I'm going to wear my long woolly underwear underneath my bike shorts. That kind of thing. So nothing was perfect. All of it is good enough. My finished pack weight ended up being 34 pounds. And if you remember from an earlier episode, I learned when I was doing my last backpacking trip that a lot of my gear was just about shot. Not having a home, I had to ship new gear to my sister's house that I was able to pick up when I visited her just before I headed to Europe. But that meant I didn't have a chance to try things out before I left. Not the smartest move, but really it was my only option since I had no time to do any kind of an exchange. There were some product shortages at REI when I went in person to go get some clothing. So I ended up with men's hiking pants and an expensive white raincoat, which is a color I would never pick because I'm always trashing my clothes in the woods. But I had to choose something from what was available. Online, I bought a new backpack and a day pack I thought was custom designed to work with this new backpack, but once I started using it, I learned my regular day pack would have worked just fine, and I would have preferred its extra roominess and comfort. One big mistake I made, and I want to pass this one on, is I packed up everything at the end of summer. And I wish I'd thought about colors. Even though I packed several layers and they, be like an onion and have layers you can peel off, peel on, the colors were wrong. I'm now coming into winter, and the summer colors, yes, I'm wearing them because that's what I got, but it looks a little out of place to have spring and summer colors. So a little funny. That's the way it goes. So my suggestion is think about the seasons, particularly if you're long-term travel. Just get neutrals that don't indicate the season. That was something I will correct the next chance I get to repack a backpack. I have used everything I've packed, but in hindsight, I wish I'd cut back the clothes even more. I also wish I would at least scrunched up some of the new stuff I bought because they were so wrinkly, they were in effect useless outside of the first day I laundered them. Because once I packed them in the suitcase, they got so crumpled, they're unpresentable. I would suggest buying quick-dried knits or performance clothing that you can wash your clothes in the sink and they'll be dry by morning. That way you just keep wearing it, and if it wears out, go get another one. If you need it someplace, they're going to sell it. And also, Jenny and I, because one thing I wished I did have was another layer of like a fleece layer. I didn't bring that. I brought my woolies, I brought my shirts, and my very light thermal jacket, thinking I'm going to be chasing weather, but it actually got pretty cold. And sometimes the thermal would be too hot for what we needed. I just needed one more layer that I can either add on or to be not quite as hot as the thermal. So we went to a thrift store, and Jenny picked out a bunch of things because she didn't bring enough cold clothes, and I was looking for this thermal thing, which I have worn to death. So I would rather have brought less clothing, but more of the temperature control type of thing. So less hiking shirts. I think I brought 2 long sleeve, roll-up sleeve, and then I brought 2 nice tank tops plus a nice tunic, and a long sleeve sun protection shirt, and 2 camis. In hindsight, I'd bring 2 of the roll-up hiking shirts that don't wrinkle, 1 tank top, 1 tunic, and a cami that I can sleep in and use to wear in the laundromat should I have to use a laundromat, which so far I've been using Airbnbs and haven't had to do so. That in the sink. And that's it for tops. I would also pack 1 lightweight midi skirt and bring a scarf not just for warmth but to enter religious sites. Leave behind the sundress. I rarely wore it, but I would keep the tennis skirt I brought because I could dress it up if need be a little bit, and I even wore it biking to hide the ugly bike shorts. And in modest areas, I could wear my woolly bottoms as leggings underneath that same skirt for coverage. The only pants I brought were some jeans and some zip-off hiking pants, plus a pair of quick-dry shorts I could wear if I had to go to a laundromat, or if I had to share a bath at a hostel. I brought 2 pairs of shoes, my trail runners, which also had to work as my city shoes, my hiking shoes, and even my Via Ferrata shoes. And there are definitely times when it would have been nicer to have true hiking shoes or boots, but I did not want to lug them around for 6 months for the few times I actually needed them. If I were in a dedicated hiking trip, however, I would certainly bring them. And plus, one good thing, unlike the old days, sneakers used to be a tip off you were a tourist, but now almost everybody, locals included, wear sneakers. The cobblestones have won. The other shoes I brought were hiking sandals. These worked as my water shoes, my beach shoes, my hostel shower shoes, my dress sandals, and I use the term dress very loosely, and at times easy hiking shoes. They also work surprisingly well for biking with their stiff sole. Since I was worried about my bottom riding the bike for so long and for so many days, I also packed a gel bike seat cover, which I'm glad I brought, but I knew I was going to be leaving that behind after the Croatian bike and boat tour. I also packed my own bike helmet, which is required for that tour, but I'm keeping that with me because I want to be able to use it for other bike rides. I brought both my hiking sticks. In hindsight, I could have gotten away with 1. I packed a sports bra, regular bra, and 4 quick-dry underwear, plus 2 pairs of wool socks and 2 pairs of toe socks. I would have only brought 1 pair of the toe socks. I also packed a tankini bathing suit. I learned the hard way, do not get a one-piece in case you have to use a porta toilet. Really difficult. Tankinis are much better. So those are the clothes I brought for me. For the guys, I would recommend a long sleeve, no wrinkle shirt, 2 hiking shirts, 1 short sleeve city shirt, a pair of pants, some zip-off hiker pants, a pair of quick dry shorts, 2 pair of wool socks, a bathing suit, for shoes, trail runners, and hiking waterproof sandals, 3 quick dry underwears, a quick dry t-shirt if you wear them, a set of woolies, and then all the same jackets and gloves and things that I brought for myself. And I brought a very much pared down emergency kit since I'd be hiking with guides who presumably have all that stuff. But I like to bring it just in case I get lost and just in case I got my own problems. I want to be able to solve my own problems. Here's what I packed. A headlamp with fresh batteries but no backup batteries, a compression sock in case I twisted an ankle or needed a tourniquet, an emergency space blanket, a small mirror to signal help, my whistle, a few Band-Aids, antibiotic ointment, a little bit of neon surveyor's tape, dryer lint mixed with petroleum jelly as a fire starter, a mini butane lighter, a mini pocket knife, and my compass. I'll put a link to the Adventure Travel Show podcast episode on emergency kits in the show notes. And here's a shameless plug. I'm really proud of that podcast as each episode succinctly gives you important tools you need to adventure safely. And if you haven't listened to it, I encourage you to check it out. I was debating whether or not I should bring my rain pants, figuring I'd be following the weather, but I have used them twice now, and I was thrilled both times I had them. As I said, it was a little bit colder than I was expecting, and in the rain, you get chilled pretty quickly. A few last oddball items I brought include a super small absorbent towel that maybe is a foot wide and 2 feet long, very thin, just it's enough to do the job, but doesn't take up any room, dries really quickly. And one thing I am super happy I packed is a silk sleeping bag liner. It's very thin, doesn't take up hardly any room, weighs nothing, and I brought it mainly for hostels. But in Europe, your bed usually just has a duvet, and I'd like a little bit more temperature control. I like a top sheet. They don't seem to do that here. And I've used my liner every day, and I love it. Another thing I brought was my water bladder, plus a life straw and Grail filter bottle in case I made it to areas with unsafe water. I originally thought I would head to Southeast Asia for the winter, but things aren't opened up enough for my taste at this point, and I'm thoroughly enjoying the Balkans. So I think I'll stick around here and then head to Spain and Portugal at the new year. In hindsight, I could have skipped the bladder and just brought extra water bottles on the few days I actually used it. Maybe I'd bring the life straw just as a backup, but I'd leave the Grail at home because I've been able to drink the tap water everywhere I've been so far. I have to bring a laptop to do the podcast. It's heavy, but I've tried doing the show with just an iPad and it just doesn't work. I bring an international electricity converter. And for biking, in addition to the gel seat and my helmet, I packed biking shorts, bike gloves, a neon wind jacket that becomes a vest so I can be seen on the streets more readily. For hiking and biking, I brought a balaclava to keep my neck and head warm, plus a wide-brimmed hat with a necktail for sun, as yet unused because it hasn't been overly hot. Plus I brought a ball cap, which is great under the rain hood because it helps keep the rain from sliding down your face. It gives you a little bit more protection in the rain. And I packed some lightweight wool gloves. Also for the rain, in addition to the rain jacket and rain pants, I also have waterproof gloves, which were used on several occasions already. Highly recommend those. They're wonderful in the cold rain. I had to pack 6 months of medicine and my special toiletries, which are, finally after 2 months in Europe, happily declining in space and weight. I also brought paper prescriptions in case I needed something. To keep my important papers safe, I put my vaccine card in a glassine envelope after I had to tape over where it was tearing at the fold. I keep it and my passport and my global entry pass in a quality zip bag to keep out the rain. I've also photographed all of them and have emailed these photographs to myself in case of loss. I also separated my money with cash I'd be needing regularly in a zip bag and my cards and other currencies in a wallet. I brought a waist money belt, which can come in handy on public transport, particularly if I might be taking a nap and in case my day pack gets swiped. I brought 2 neoprene water bottles. And a little side note, Jen and I discovered that a bottle of wine fits in the bottle so we could have an inexpensive happy hour watching the sunset on a bench by the water, and we didn't have to worry about breakage in our suitcase. By the way, I'm enjoying the Balkan wines, and the price is certainly right. I've had decent bottles for $4 to $6. Another thing I brought is a roll-up waterproof storage stuff bag like the kind I use to hang my food away from bears. And I use that to hold my snacks in my day pack. And of course, I brought sunglasses, a glass holder for when I'm out in the water, and sunscreen. Lastly, I packed a couple of empty zip bags labeled trash and a small zip bag with TP in it. And I'm pleased to report, for the first time ever in Europe, all bathrooms I've used have had toilet paper. Which reminds me of a funny toilet story. Noma and I had gone to use the ladies' room, and so I was there when Noma saw her first, and frankly the only one I've seen so far on this trip, her very first squat toilet. So out of her stall, I hear Noma say, "Oh, my." But she's a trooper. She figured it out. But back to packing. I wanted to ship some clothes back, but the cost was prohibitive. Plus, I'd brought some of my favorite things, so I decided to just keep carrying the extra 5 pounds of clothes I wouldn't be using. I'm having more of a space issue these days, too, because I packed my clothes in 2 compression bags. Although I did bring a backup in case one of them broke, but they're breaking, they're not working, so it's getting really hard to zip up my backpack. This is another reason I wish I'd packed less so I wouldn't have to use those bags. I'm not bringing them anymore. I don't trust them unless I get a proper one like a sleeping bag compression bag. Note how I said I brought my favorite things? Here's an insight too. Don't bring your favorite things. So if you find you're in a jam or you just brought the wrong stuff, bring stuff you like all right, they're in good enough shape, but you don't mind leaving them behind and get something that's more appropriate or just reducing your pack once you see what you're actually using. So those are my packing insights. Just about done now. I want to talk a little bit about traveling during COVID. If you have not gotten vaccinated, from what I've seen, you're going to be testing yourself like crazy if you're trying to travel multi-country. You need to be with the vaccine at least 14 days out of having the full course of vaccines. You need to bring your original vaccine card, or they have an EU pass if you're from the EU, but my vaccine cards worked fine. Some places still require a test. I see that less and less as I'm getting further away from Western Europe. Italy checked more than any country, but remember how awful they had it in the beginning of COVID. So they're probably more scarred than almost any country out there as being one of the first epicenters of the crisis. So in the restaurants, they would want to see your passport. The further away I got away from Italy, the less I had to show it. And of course, they always ask you when you cross the border. In Slovenia, they've just believed you. They asked, and they knew that we couldn't enter the country unless we had the passport. And then in Bosnia, nobody asks or cares, and hardly anybody wears a mask. But you need to check, and recheck before you travel and change countries of what the requirements are, because they do change weekly, it seems. But I see that it is getting less and less as I'm now recording this in middle of November of 2021. And I think the worst of it hopefully is behind us and things seem to be opening up. But still, for me to go back to the U.S., in addition to showing my vaccine card, I got to do another test. I did pack 2 private tests that I can test, and then you work with somebody on the phone to get the results. That way I don't have to scramble in that last 72 hours before my flight trying to figure out where to get the test. Just about everybody on my Croatia trip were heading back to the U.S. afterwards and got tested, and happily they all got the green light to go home. And when you check, a good place to check is the State Department website. I think it's pretty good about that, but also Google the country. You want to make doubly sure you do it right. Some of them might say you must be tested, but if you look at the fine print, it might say, or you have the vaccine card, you're fine. I ran into that in Serbia. Big letters, you must get tested, but then right below, in smaller letters, it said, unless you had a full course of vaccination over 14 days ago. My final advice is to get out there and travel. Now is an extraordinarily great time to do so. Crowds are down, prices are down. The locals are pleased to see you because they really, really hurt from not seeing us, and so we're a little bit more appreciated than we may have been a couple years ago. And we may never get this window of opportunity to see what it was like a long time ago before things got so crowded. And if you do book with any of my affiliates, Please remember to use my promo codes. Not only will you be saving money, but you'll also be supporting the show at no additional cost to you. I also encourage you to use my Amazon link for the same reason. Even if you don't buy anything, when you enter Amazon with my link, I still get credit for it. So if you're planning on buying anything at all, just please bookmark my link, use that to get into Amazon, ignore the stuff on the page that's not of interest, and then just put in their search what it is that you're actually looking for. I would appreciate that extra 2-second step. It helps keep the show going and keeps it ad-free. I'd be very grateful. Thank you. You'll find links to everything that we talked about today and my Amazon and promo links in the show notes. Of course, you can find it on my website on the resources page. I hope you've enjoyed today's show, and I hope that I've given you some insights on how you might add a little bit more travel to your life, and maybe in a way you hadn't thought to try before. I encourage you to try doing open-ended travel where you don't really know exactly where you're going. It might make you a little twitchy, but twitchy is good. It helps build confidence. It helps you grow. It gives you confidence. And I think that translates when you get back home, you can use that newfound strength to progress in your everyday life. Until next time, this is Kit Parks. Adventure on.